Social media effects on self-esteem. What effect does appearance-focused social media have on self-esteem? This topic was chosen because of its relevance to today's world. According to Pew Research for 2021, some 84% of adults aged 18 to 29 say that they ever use any social media sites, which is similar to the share of those ages 30 to 49 who say this, 81%. This question relates to social psychology because social media affects the way individuals interpret the self through others. Cooley dramatized this idea by calling it the looking glass self. Throughout life, we engage with new people in various ways, and our view of the self is modified through the feedback we receive from others. The feedback has to be interpreted by the self to figure out what others think of us and experience pride or shame as a result. Social media is a constant game of judgment and comparing material riches, body images, dance skills, talent, careers, and the list continues. The worst part about social media is that it never turns off, and reprieve from shame and guilt is carried with us until we lay our heads down at night. Self-esteem is the evaluation of the self-concept, and questions asked in social media affect how capable, successful, important, and worthy we may think that we are. However, some characteristics may be more valuable to us in our self-esteem than others. Contingencies are the characteristics of self or categories of outcomes that a person stakes self-esteem. If we are to weigh our positive identities and traits as most important, we can keep a high level of self-esteem while remaining in acceptance of our weaknesses. One study found links and self-esteem and likes were diminished by those with greater purpose in their lives, attributing to those with a higher self-esteem. On the other hand, social comparison is argued to be a contributing factor to low self-esteem. Since idealistic information is presented on social media, it has increased these comparison norms, and people spend more time on social media. These two factors increase the likelihood for individuals to believe others have more successful and overall better lives. Self-esteem is sourced from family acceptance, feedback on the effectiveness of our actions, and assessments of our own successes and failures with others. Social media allows for likes and comments on our lives that we post every day. So, a little review on this topic. So, social media is a constant game of judgment and comparing material riches, body images, dance skills, talent, careers, and the list continues. Anthony Burrow used the social media theory, which ascertains the view that self-esteem is adjusted to a person's perceived relational value. According to this, positive feedback should boost self-esteem because it shows acceptance by others. The difference in their two studies compared to the other works is that they include purpose in life as a manipulated variable. The hypothesis was that greater purpose would lessen their sensitivity to social media feedback. 246 respondents were measured on purpose in life using the 6-item life engagement test indicating purpose with questions like, "There is not enough purpose in my life." Responses ranged from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. Self-esteem was assessed using the 10-item Rosenberg self-esteem scale with questions like, "On the whole, I am satisfied with myself," and on a scale from 1 to 5. Participants also reported the number of friends and likes their profile received on average. The author's results supported the hypothesis that receiving a greater number of likes was positively related with self-esteem, with those that scored lower on purpose, and the opposite was true for those that scored higher on purpose. However, both groups had effects on self-esteem. So on the other hand, social comparison is argued to be a contributing factor to low self-esteem. Since idealistic information is presented on social media, it has increased these comparison norms, and people spend more time on social media. Jiang and Yang conducted a study in Singapore using online survey data in July of 2018 and with 220 participants. The hypothesis was that Instagram use will have an indirect effect on social anxiety mediated by social comparison and self-esteem. Social comparison was measured by the Iowa Netherlands Comparison Orientation Measure on 11 items. And again, the participants answered on a 5-point Likert type scale, ranging from 1 to 5, starting with strongly disagree to strongly agree, with questions like, I always like to know what others in a similar situation would do. Self-esteem was assessed using the same Rosenberg self-esteem scale as mentioned before. And finally, social anxiety was measured using the social interaction anxiety scale on with 6 statements using the same 5-point scale. The results showed that their hypothesis was supported. However, the direct path from Instagram to social anxiety was insignificant, which found that social comparison and self-esteem helped settle the effect of Instagram use on social anxiety. These results are similar to Anthony Burroughs' study because one of their potential concerns in their findings is the strong correlation between purpose and self-esteem. There was substantial variation in reported self-esteem with those that had higher levels of purpose. Here we have Midgley, Claire, and other authors who also focused on social comparison on social media and the effects on self-esteem. Instead of using self-reporting, they used comparisons made in real-time browsing news feeds. So there were 213 students in this study, and the authors, they measured the moods, state of self-esteem, and life satisfaction after participants browsed Facebook or Instagram. The hypothesis was that the more extreme the upward comparison, the more negative impact on their self-esteem. Again, the 10-item Rosenberg self-esteem scale was used. These authors found that those with lower self-esteem reported making more extreme comparisons compared to those with higher self-esteem. They also found that participants made many comparisons in a single feed observing a session, and these comparisons were correlated with lower self-esteem. Here we have adolescents, social media, and self-esteem. So Patty Valkenburg and other authors found some consistent effects on self-esteem and social media in adolescents in 18 earlier studies. This created their hypothesis that mixed findings suggest that social media use effects are different amongst adolescents. They tested this with 387 adolescents, and each participant reported on social media use and self-esteem 6 times per day. And again, they used the same Rosenberg self-esteem scale mentioned on the previous 2. Interestingly, they found that 88% saw no or small positive or negative effects on social media usage on changes in self-esteem. 4% saw positive effects and 8% saw negative effects on self-esteem, concluding that effects on self-esteem with social media usage does in fact depend on the individual. So here we have Teikaiden and authors who conducted a cross-sectional study of 373 medical students across academic years to find out the effects social media has on students' self-esteem, but used an electronic questionnaire via Google Forms. The questionnaire included Rosenberg's self-esteem scale, like the previous studies mentioned again. The authors hypothesized that psychological factors like low self-esteem can play a role in internet addiction, causing negative self-worth. Students become depressed, isolated, and use social media to cope, but find this only makes things worse. Their hypothesis was proven correct because students with low self-esteem scores were found to report that their health and social relationships were negatively affected by social media. Every study discussed found effects of social media on self-esteem, but there was usually an underlying variable like social comparison, purpose in life, or previous levels of self-esteem. There's no one-size-fits-all to social media, but it is something that needs to be considered when deciding the time spent on social media platforms. So the research method I chose was qualitative interviews. It was chosen, this research method is used in social science research to view internal thought that may be impossible to observe directly or discuss in a public forum. Responses from participants are subjective to what is based in a natural setting. An interview is a one-on-one conversation about a specific topic conducted by the researcher with various questions. This interview setting allows the participants to open up and answer questions honestly. But the researcher needs to be aware of asking leading questions to avoid unreliable data. This study is not generalizable and uses a more interpretive approach versus the hypothetical deductive method in research. The researcher gains the respondent's trust through empathizing and listening to the subject without judgment. With open-ended questions, the insight to the topic discussed offers a wide variety of insight for the researcher instead of being pigeonholed into numerical data answers like in quantitative analysis. In-depth interviews are a unique way to allow the respondents to explain how they understand and interpret the world around them. Qualitative interviewing was appropriate for this topic to gain insight on the participants' use of social media, their purpose in life, and levels of self-esteem. Prior literature includes purpose and self-esteem having a correlation to negative effects when using appearance-based social media, so these subjects were included in the interview questions. Interviewing allows the researcher to delve deeper into the topic of social media and how it affects them, while also asking follow-up questions as to what the respondent meant to gain clarification. An alternative option, like survey questions, would not encourage honesty, allow for transparency, and are difficult to develop rapport with respondents. There were 3 separate interviews conducted via Google Duo, a video chat application. The interviews were conducted over 2 hours within the same day. Due to time constraints and no IRB approval, only 3 people over the age of 18 were able to participate in these interviews. 9 questions were asked within the interview as follows on the next slide. So each interview contained these questions in order with probing questions inserted as necessary to clarify respondents' answers. So Google Duo allowed for recording to transcribe later so that the interview may feel more relaxed and a trusting conversation as to receive more transparency with answers. Each participant was aware that they were being recorded, and the purpose of the interview for research was for my class at CBU. Each question was made in simple language and contained direct language for each participant to gain encouragement to share their own experience. So after each interview was completed, the video was played back to transcribe in Microsoft Word, while also notating facial expressions and body language. In the answers to the interview questions, I gained first-hand knowledge of the experiences of the participants on the effects of social media on self-esteem and how their purpose is affected by social media. Ultimately, the results of the interviews were successful in correlation to prior literature. The questions were: how long are you typically active on social media such as Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok a week? How have social media platforms like these affected the way you view your appearance? What do you look for when you're on social media? How does your use of social media impact your self-worth? Do you feel like you have a sense of purpose in your life? And if so, how does social media affect that? How does social media impact the way you feel about yourself? If you saw a person on social media that you view as better in some capacity, how does that make you feel about yourself? How has your use of social media affected your relationship? And where does positive self-esteem come from for you in your life? So 3 interviews were conducted with social media hours that were ranging from 14 hours to 40 hours a week. So all responses to the second question that asked how social media affected the way you view your appearance showed the need to appear a certain way to others. One participant mentioning, listed here on this bulletin, I want myself to look a certain way and I don't, so it affects me negatively. The reasons for social media was for means to laugh, job skills, and to keep up with friends and family. Each participant could identify their purpose in life, saying social media reminds me of the adventures I've had with my family and the good times in my life. However, when asked about self-esteem and the way social media impacts that, one participant said, it makes me feel empty by comparing myself to them. I've learned that comparing myself does not bring any good emotions, but it happens naturally online. When I'm looking at memes online is when I get benefits from social media because it makes me laugh and happy. This pattern followed with the remaining of the interviews. When social media is used for focusing on the comparison to others, self-esteem drops because it allows people to focus on their flaws. When there is a sense of purpose for participants, like every person mentioned having, they can direct their thinking to the positive parts of life and focus on what is important, maintaining their positive self-esteem. I was convinced that the interviews would find all the negative impacts it has on individuals' lives, but was surprised to see how mindset changes this entirely. Throughout life, we engage with new people in various ways that modify the self through the feedback we receive from others, like Delamater and Colette mentioned. Today, social media is one of the primary ways of engagement. Social media can be a source of detrimental effects by comparing ourselves to others, resulting in low self-esteem. However, through this research, the qualitative data showed some surprising results. If social media is to be used for the right reasons, a person has a good sense of purpose and has the ability to redirect their thinking towards gratitude or have contingencies based outside the comparison to others. The data falls in line with all of the prior literature discussed. Greater purpose lessens sensitivity to social media feedback. Comparisons are related to lower self-esteem. And social media affects relationships for those with low self-esteem. Social media allows others to engage in tactical management, only presenting what they want to be seen to get desired results of their self-concept. It is easier to accomplish a false sense of self online, but what those with good self-esteem will have an easier time navigating social media than others who do not. This draws the importance of self-esteem to the forefront. Those with high self-esteem perform better in most aspects of their lives. When we lack standards to evaluate ourselves, social comparison is more likely to happen. Another technique to protect self-esteem is to remain committed to self-concept that remains parallel to our self-evaluation. Listed here are the references that I used during this presentation.